Heard you were DB Cooper. DB Cooper. You want the Cooper story? I can't give it to you, because I'm not him.
Said, "You're being hijacked. I've got a bomb. Come sit next to me."
Don't know his identity. Don't know where he came from. Don't know what happened to him.
On the day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man with the name Dan Cooper boarded a flight from Portland to Seattle.
This is the only unsolved hijacking case in FBI history.
He wanted $200,000, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck to refuel the plane at Seattle. He opened the rear door and jumped out with the money and 2 parachutes.
On November 24, 1971, Portland International Airport, a man named Dan Cooper boards Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 to Seattle. The flight crew and the passengers describe him as an unremarkable guy. He's a Caucasian male, he's got on a dark suit, black tie, carrying a briefcase, he's one of the last to board. Sits in the last row in 18E. He orders a bourbon and dons a pair of sunglasses. The plane takes off at 2:50 p.m. The flight from Portland to Seattle is about an hour in the air. This time around, the plane's carrying 36 passengers and 6 crew members. Everything's going according to the plan. Everything's on schedule until the man seated in the last row, Cooper, hands a note to the flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She doesn't read it at first. She puts it in her pocket and then Cooper says to her, "You might want to read that." The note says, "I have a bomb and I'd like you to sit next to me." Florence Schaffner understandably sort of loses it, but she does comply and follows his instructions. Cooper opens his briefcase, revealing a makeshift bomb. Schaffner describes the contents of the briefcase as something that looks like 8 sticks of dynamite, a battery, and a bunch of wires. Cooper has her attention. She knows he's serious. He demands 4 parachutes and a ransom of $200,000. When the plane lands in Seattle, Schaffner relays the hijacker commands to Captain William Scott. But since it's such a short flight, ground forces need more time to react. So air traffic control keeps the plane circling around for 2 hours until they can gather the money. Investigators write down the serial number of every bill and then bundle it up into a bank bag. The plane finally lands in Seattle at 5:46 p.m. Captain Scott parks the plane away from the building. Cooper sends out a different flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, and she goes out and interacts with the authorities there. She collected the money and the parachutes and then returned to the plane. She also brings printed instructions on how to use the parachutes, but Cooper tells her he does not need them. Cooper agrees to let the passengers off the plane. 2 flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and Alice Hancock, also ask to leave, and Cooper allows them to. But the ordeal isn't over for the rest of the crew. Cooper wants to take off again and start the head towards Mexico City. He's going to keep the 4 remaining crew members as hostages: the flight attendant, the flight engineer, the first officer, and the captain. For this second flight, Cooper makes more demands. Cooper wants the pilots to fly with the wing flaps in an unusual configuration, a downward position. Now that's how a plane normally takes off, but then they raise the flaps. You wouldn't fly long haul with the flaps down because it creates enormous drag and means it can't go very fast. See? Something like 200 miles per hour. Cooper also asks that they keep the landing gear down and fly below 10,000 feet. He wants them to be going super slow and super low. The pilots tell Cooper it can't be done. They are afraid the plane might just fall out of the sky, but the hijacker is adamant and that it will work, and they need to comply at 7:40 p.m. The plane takes off for Mexico City, but 20 minutes into the flight, Cooper does something completely unexpected. He lowers the plane's rear air stair. The 727 has a set of stairs that could be lowered out of the back of the airplane. The pilot gets a warning light when this happens. Once Cooper lowers the stairs around 8 p.m., he puts on his parachute, grabs his $200,000 and jumps out of the plane. At 11 p.m., the pilot safely lands the plane in Reno. At this point, the flight crew has stayed in the cockpit and they are not sure if Cooper is still in the plane or not. But when the FBI searches the plane, Cooper is definitely gone. Almost immediately, the story spread like wildfire. B.B. Cooper bailed out of a Northwest Airlines jet going 200 miles per hour at about 10,000 feet. The best guess is he jumped almost exactly over Center, Washington. The FBI takes the lead on the case with assistance from sheriffs and state troopers in Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. They have very little to go on. This guy has committed an incredibly well-planned crime. Authorities need to begin somewhere. They start with his name. They know he bought a ticket under the name Dan Cooper. The FBI doesn't really suspect that's his real name, but criminals often choose an alias that's very close to their real name. So they run this idea by the Portland police, and as luck would have it, they know of a petty criminal who goes by the name D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper lives about an hour and a half from Portland in the Oregon. He's got a minor record, so police gave him in the system. It's a long shot, but they know they have to start somewhere. And they're hopeful they can nab him on his way home with $200,000 of stolen money. A police officer drives to D.B. Cooper's house in the night of the hijacking, planning to stake it out until Cooper comes home and catch him red-handed. But as soon as the officer arrives, he sees Cooper's already home. It seems unreasonable that D.B. Cooper would have committed the skyjacking, jumped out of the plane, and made it back home to his house in the Dells. The timeline doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form, so despite having a similar name and a criminal record, D.B. Cooper is quickly ruled out as the hijacker. Meanwhile, at Reno Airport, authorities race to gather evidence on the plane. Inside the plane, FBI agents find 66 latent fingerprints but can't identify any of them. They also find Cooper's black clip on tie and tie clip, some cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes. That's it. That's all they have. In 1971, we don't have fingerprints, databases like we do today. We also don't have DNA at this time. The tie clip and the tie are pretty unremarkable, so they are going to be hard to trace. There's nothing on the plane. It immediately tells us who the hijacker is. With little to go on a large-scale, manhunt begins. The FBI knows that he jumped out of the plane somewhere between Seattle and Reno, and now they need to know where to look. But it's hard to determine Cooper's landing zone because they don't know exactly when and where he jumped. There's so many variables involved. What was the wind speed? When did he pull the ripcord? When and where was the plane exactly when he jumped? It's next to impossible to establish an accurate search area, but they start with a massive section of really thick forest north of Portland. The Air Force actually loans them an SR-71 Blackbird to help them photograph the entire flight area in hopes to developing a clue. Though the Blackbird retraces the hijack plane's flight path 5 times, their search turns up empty. The Oregon National Guard brings out helicopters to search for Cooper. They find some plastic and broken 3 limbs, but it turns out it has nothing to do with the crime. And then 200 US Army soldiers search the forest on foot. There's also a private salvage company that searched Lake Muin with a submarine looking for evidence of Cooper. At the bottom of the lake, they don't find anything. Despite all this effort, no trace of Cooper is found. People don't just disappear. He has to be somewhere. The FBI wants to get his face out to the public, hoping someone has seen him with no actual photo to go. FBI enlists the help of a sketch artist. They talk to the people who were at the Portland airport who saw him by his jacket and people who were on the airplane. Both sets of witnesses give a near identical description of the man. He is a Caucasian man in his mid-40s with a somewhat dark olive complexion. He has a receding hairline, short dark hair, and is wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. This sketch, which has become world famous, comes out about a week after the hijacking on November 28, 1971. It generates hundreds if not thousands of tips. You have to understand D.B. Cooper almost becomes a legend. There's kind of a Cooper mania surrounding him. He's kind of like Jesse James or Billy the Kid, this kind of common man who beats the system, and in the 1970s, that's the coolest thing you can do. Claiming to be D.B. Cooper, especially in the Pacific Northwest, is just a way to get your 15 minutes of fame. This is a nightmare to these poor investigators, because they have to sift through all these false confessions. After a few years, many agents speculate that they will never really find the real Cooper. The unsolved case continues to captivate the public. 5 decades after the skyjacking took place. Perhaps someday, one of the many passionate sleuths still investigating this mystery will help us discover D.B. Cooper's real name.